Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our latest session. It's great to have you with us. It's great to be with you in virtual Sweden and the Nordics. I'm delighted as people are arriving. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Laszlo Simity. Laszlo, for his sins, is the Director of Technical Services, EMEA, at Source Labs. And Laszlo will be discussing with us um, issues around delivering ultimate mobile app quality, the optimum combination of frameworks, environments to deliver continuous testing. So just before I hand over to Laszlo, a quick reminder of a couple of things. First of all, the top right of your screen, you can, within your browser window, you can maximize this view so that when Laszlo starts to share slides, you'll still be able to see him talking to you, or you can leave it as the default size, in which case you will just see the slides. To the right, if you're not maximized, you'll see there's a Q&A panel, and you can send in questions for Laszlo, which I will share with him as we go through. If you are maximized, you won't see the Q&A panel, so you'll need to bring it back down to just the slide view to send in questions. So with all of that said, thank you very much, and let me hand over to Laszlo.
Thank you very much, Justin. Let me just share my screen here. Can you see those slides, Justin?
Yep, that's come up nicely.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Justin, for the kind introduction, and welcome everybody to this session this morning. As Justin mentioned, I am Laszlo Simity, Director of Technical Services in EMEA. I'm based in actually very sunny London this morning. And the session this morning is really about delivering the ultimate app quality. So we're going to talk about how we can use testing, particularly focusing in on frameworks and environments and how we execute our tests to make sure that we're able to deliver flawless experiences for our customers. Just by way of a very brief introduction, I've been at Source Labs for the last almost 3 years. And prior to that, I worked at HP Software for quite some period in all kinds of different roles, including product management and strategy. But if we zoom all the way back, my first job in IT in the late 1990s was actually as a manual tester. I was still at university, but I was a manual tester. I'd come into the office a few days a week. I was actually testing a back office application for a master trust, so a financial instrument kind of unique to Australia. And so I've had sort of 20 years of experience in and around testing, which I think gives me a bit of context around some of the new and exciting challenges we have in our industries. I'm sure many of you have as well. So really, without further ado, let's jump in. And just before we start, I want to kind of frame our discussion this morning. And, you know, it's clear that apps are critical to our business. And I'm going to guess that a very large number of different presentations you see all across the industry, no matter what topic, all start with such a simple and obvious statement. But I think it's worth repeating because the reality is apps are critical to our business. You know, if you think about your experience as a consumer, this becomes really true. And there is no industry that illustrates this point more clearly than the financial industry. You know, as a customer, I haven't visited my bank in years. The last time I did that was when I received a refund check from the government. I don't think they even send checks anymore. I think they do that electronically. And so effectively, my entire experience as a customer of the bank is through what happens on the mobile app or through the website. And so my impression of their brand and who they are is entirely formed by what experience I have. This is true of, I think, many or perhaps even most customers of all of our companies. The app is the way that we communicate with our customers. And if it doesn't work, then the impression our customers have of our organization is low. And at the same time as these apps are so critical to our business, of course, our choices are really endless on how we deliver a flawless experience. We're going to talk today about how we can use testing to ensure that we are delivering quality applications. We're going to see these choices are endless. What environment do I test on? What sort of frameworks could we use? How do we develop our applications? What sort of applications are we developing? But at the same time that these choices are endless, the impact of getting it wrong is really high because, of course, the app is critical to our business. In addition, we also have unique challenges in the financial services industry that I'm going to touch on in just a moment. And these perhaps limit or at least shape what choices we can make. And of course, overarching everything we talk about today is this really unique period we're living in. And the fact that I'm here at home, at the end of a Zoom channel, as I'm sure many of you are this morning, instead of in beautiful Stockholm together, having some nice coffee and croissant, kind of illustrates the point that this is a really unique history period. And although software development is very easily done remotely, it is actually having an impact on how we test our applications. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic is changing the way we test and what we can try and do to cope with that. So today, what I want to do is ask the question and perhaps start answering, how do we make sure that we can give our customers flawless experiences with our brand, with the brand of the organization that we work for? So let's go in to the presentation now. And the very first thing I want to touch on is financial services, the unique challenges we have in this industry. I think the first thing that I want to call out, that perhaps is the most obvious as well, is security. When we deal with people's money and by extension, therefore, very personal information about their circumstances, we need to have a high sensitivity for security, both logical and physical. And although it's obvious, and I think everyone on this webinar this morning would intrinsically understand that, it's worth calling out because, in fact, it does create a situation where our choices may become more limited. We may have limitations around test data. We have limitations around where we can run certain tests and how we can do that. We might have to get really creative. There might be certain use cases that we can test through cloud vendors, and certain cases we can only test on premise. So this is worth calling out. Of course, the apps that we are building might also have high thresholds of security as well. For example, retail banking apps really led the charge on the use of biometrics. So the use of thumbprints, Face ID, and other technologies to really double check that the user who's accessing the application and who can make big financial decisions is actually the person we think they are. We have some special use cases. I was working with a bank in the UK recently where they were testing an app which is used by an iPad when you walk into the branch, and this app would only work on the Wi-Fi network present in branches. And so the testers were asking, how do we test this? How do we test this from home and in different circumstances? I've also seen some very interesting use cases around, for example, opening bank accounts online, where you're required to put your passport up to a webcam. So some different and interesting use cases. Really also for retail banks and other applications that have really wide usage in society, you also have additional challenges. How do we make sure that our apps work across all the different types of devices that people use in our society and give them a flawless experience? Old horrible Android devices, right through to kind of the very latest flagship devices. And of course, the final thing that I want to point out was that there is often very high public visibility on failure. I've pulled out some different headlines here from the UK about online and mobile banking fails that have made news headlines, a situation obviously none of us want to be in here. But these can be very high profile if we get it wrong. So let's jump in now and talk a little bit about some of these different strategies. The first thing I want to talk about is to just set the stage that, in fact, there are 3 different types of mobile apps that you can build. And your organization may be building one or all of these. The first is what are known as native apps. These are apps built with the SDKs of Android or of iOS. So they're native elements. They provide the best user experience insofar as the elements look good, they're very easy to interact with, they're fast and responsive. But they're a lot of work, and you typically have to build one app in iOS and one app in Android. And so there is another type of app that people are building, and these are known as hybrid apps. This is effectively an app you download off the App Store like normal, but in fact, the majority of the app content is a web browser. That's known as a web view. It may not appear very obvious to the user that it's actually a browser with just a web page with native elements around it, but that's basically how you build that. The final one is actually just websites. People are building websites that are optimized for mobile browsers. And so we'll call those mobile web apps. And look, each of these have specific strengths and weaknesses that we won't go into today, but it is important to call this out because, in fact, the type of application you're testing has a very significant impact on how you can actually test that. And we'll cover those in the course of the next few minutes. Okay, so we've got these 3 different types of apps. Let's cover the first topic, which is frameworks. Automated test frameworks have been around for a very long time. Again, I remember back in 1999, we had some test tools from Mercury and others. And of course, today we have, like everything, so much more choice. And organizations, I'm often talking to people and they're kind of asking, well, what frameworks should we be choosing to test our mobile application? And the answer is really complicated. Some of the options you have are on this screen. If you're just testing web, people are increasingly choosing tools like Cypress, Test Cafe, Puppeteer, Playwright. They might choose Selenium as our more traditional choice. If you're building a hybrid or native application, people are often choosing tools like Appium, a platform and language agnostic framework. And increasingly as well on the right, we have the rise of native frameworks. We have XCUITest on iOS and Espresso on Android. And these are frameworks built by Apple and Google respectively to actually allow you to build tests in the native development environments of these particular platforms and test on the device. There are many others that I haven't covered today. This is not exhaustive. What I'm trying to show is that there are many choices that organizations can make here. And I think the reality is that people would like a very simple answer to what is the best choice. But it's like in so much in life, this is not a simple binary answer. Different frameworks have different strengths and different weaknesses. I've highlighted on this slide here the strengths and weaknesses around native frameworks versus Appium. And you can see here that sometimes your choices will be more simple. If you're developing a mobile website, it's clear you can't use Espresso and XCUITest, and so these can be removed from contention. If you're developing a native app or a hybrid app, native frameworks have really many benefits. They're fast because they run on the device. Developers can write them in Android Studio or in Xcode, where in an environment and language they're familiar with. But they also have some drawbacks. You may not be able to easily automate all of your companion apps or other functions to simulate all of the scenarios you might need to test. So they might have some limitations. On the other side, we have our old stalwart of Appium. Appium has many benefits. It runs on 6 languages. You can write tests in 6 languages. They also You can run it across Android and iOS. You don't need to write two separate scripts. But there is more attention needed to get it right from the very beginning to reduce flakiness and improve its speed. But there is an ability to automate everything, and it's language and platform agnostic, as I said. Going back to my first statement on this slide, I think it's clear that not one solution is likely to be the right one for you. But ask yourself some questions. Who writes your automated tests? Are native frameworks better if your developers are writing tests? And is Appium better if you've got a QA department writing tests? What sort of app are you building? And then also maybe consider a heterogeneous solution where perhaps if developers are encouraged to write tests early on in the test cycle, perhaps doing that in Espresso, or XCUI, or Cypress, or other more native solutions is the right choice there. And then building more end-to-end tests in Appium and Selenium and other more broad-based frameworks might be the best solution for later in the test cycle. So I think this is less of an answer and more a series of questions. Think about it in a heterogeneous way. Some of the other choices that we have to make when trying to deliver flawless experiences for our customers is actually on what environment do we do our testing? We have three different options here. We can test for mobile websites only, we can test these on a desktop browser. And in this case, all we do is we resize a desktop browser, the Chrome that I'm using to present this deck, for example, into something that approximates a mobile device with a mobile viewport. We can also use something known as emulator or simulators. These are actually like a virtual machine. You run them on your laptop. They're literally the whole mobile operating system virtually running on your laptop. Finally, of course, we can use real devices to do our testing and development. And these are, these real physical devices that we all have in our pockets or on our desks. Okay, so these are three different types of environments we have. So what do we choose? What are the different strengths of each of these environments, and which ones are right for our testing to deliver these flawless experiences for our customers, to make sure that we're testing the right things at the right time to make sure that it works perfectly for all of our customers? Let's go through each of these three in detail. The first is desktop browsers. And again, this is only applicable if you've got a mobile website. They have really fantastic benefits, really fast execution, matter of seconds to launch. You can use headless execution. They're scalable. You can create 20 or 100 in Docker containers and get a lot of testing done very quickly. They're cross-platform. They work on anything. But they have some significant drawbacks. It's a desktop browser. Rendering is different. There are different browser code bases. Google themselves say Chrome, testing your mobile website in Chrome should not guarantee that it will work on Chrome on an Android device. So it is important to consider also that this is a significant downside. It's clearly not a device. It's not a real device. None of your users are accessing your application in a resized Chrome window with the mobile viewport turned on. So we move to emulators and simulators. They're really easy to set up. Just download, install, and run. With one exception, and that is that if you want to run iOS simulators, you must have a Mac. So there's no easy solution on Windows. But they're really simple. They're really scalable, like all virtualizations. It's easy to scale. We just need more compute. They can run in parallel simply. Because they're virtual, we can control them with software. So that means they are reliable. We also have, because it's a full mobile operating system, we have the full native API. We can test all kinds of interesting use cases. They may not be very common, but incoming calls, SMSs, and so on. And we're also able to simulate different scenarios. Networking and device state are two examples of that. We can do that programmatically. But they also have downsides. For Android manufacturers take the base Android operating system and they build their operating system around it. So if you're Samsung, you take Android and you build your source, what they call secret source, around your base operating system. Very few Android manufacturers actually release an emulator. And so most Android testing occurs on what's known as a vanilla Android image. This is just the basic core operating system. So it might be that testing, that the testing that you do is not entirely representative of what your customer will see. You, of course, don't get real resource usage, so you won't really understand whether or not, is this actually what it feels like to be a user of our application? It won't be the same performance. We don't know the CPU memory performance. So there's some limitations here. There's some edge cases. Of course, you won't get real NFC or Bluetooth. Some of your use cases may require this as well. So much better in terms of closer to what your customers will use, but also some disadvantages. What about real devices now? So real devices have some great advantages. They're faster than emulators because you don't have an emulated hardware layer, and you don't have to wait for the simulator or emulator to boot before you start testing. There, of course, the biggest advantage is it's actually the real thing. You have complete validation. You remove the risk that you're testing on emulations and simulations and things that are not what the customers, your users are really using. So the biggest advantage of real devices is it gives you complete peace of mind that the application works as you expect in the environment you need. They also have disadvantages. Costs, of course, they're expensive. We all know how expensive new mobile phones are. Keeping up with device concurrency is difficult. When new phones come out, it's not always available immediately. You know, all of us are probably running out buying iPhone 12s last week. And reliability is challenging. If you're using CI/CD and other kinds of agile DevOps type methodologies, it may be that trying to get them connected to your pipeline and build nodes is really difficult. So again, lots of positives and negatives and lots of choices. So what do you do? I'd like to introduce the concept of the mobile test pyramid. This was originally created by Quo Ding, who's a test consultant in the Netherlands. I think this gives us a really nice visual representation about how we should think about testing on our mobile apps. The bulk of the testing that we do is functional and unit testing. And in these cases, we should be considered using browsers for mobile web and hybrid apps, or emulators and simulators for native apps. And you know, these are cheap, scalable, reliable, they're easy to simulate different scenarios, and they enable us to get testing done quickly and easily, get feedback as fast as possible. But at some point, we're delivering critical pieces of functionality to our customers. And it's not good enough to say, I think it'll be okay. We've tested on emulator or simulator. We need to reduce our risk. We need to validate that our application actually works on the device our customers will use. We need to test it on an iPhone. We need to test it on a Samsung Galaxy. And so to do that, we need to validate it on real devices. That doesn't mean performing all of the functional testing we've done before, but doing a small set of tests on real devices, and also doing things like visual testing. Are the layout of components correct? Is the performance of our application right? And is everything else working as we expect? So think about the environments you test on more like the pyramid. You need all of these options, and you need to deploy all of them at different stages in development for different reasons. Finally, now we've talked about environments, the question becomes, where do we execute these tests? Now, the traditional solution might be your laptop. You've got an app, you'll run up an emulator or simulator, or you'll plug your phone into your laptop and you'll start testing. They're fast, they're simple, you have full control, but you are limited to what device you have at your desk or available through your emulator or simulator. The second option, of course, is an on-prem device farm. You can just go down to the shop, buy lots of different devices, have full control and security. But of course, who manages them? Someone in your team needs to find out where the devices are in the office. Are the devices secure? Who's making sure that there's not malicious apps installed? Who performs updates on the operating systems or stops updates so you can test on old versions? And how is all of this going to fit in with your automated testing in your pipeline and the surrounding infrastructure required? But then something happened this year which has created a massive problem for the on-prem device farm. And of course, that is COVID-19 and the need for us all suddenly to work from home. And this has meant that many organizations are struggling with the issue that everyone's at home. We can't give them devices to test or to develop on anymore. And we need to somehow somehow provide our development environment with new devices. And of course, one solution to this, and this will not surprise you since I'm from Source Labs, is to talk about the device cloud. And these are clouds like Source Labs where you have these real devices, emulators and browsers all sat in a cloud environment, and you can test on hundreds of different types of mobile devices, either through a browser for automated testing or with automation. You can assess security centrally by your security team, and it's generally high because, of course, that's the bread and butter of these companies. You get relief from device management. Your team can access these devices from anywhere, so it's work from home proof. You have easy integration with CI/CD processes because we've built these in and all of our competitors as well. The downsides on this, of course, are speed. It's always going to be a bit slower than something that is connected via USB cable. And of course, cost. There's undoubtedly some cost that enables this ease of use and integration. So I would consider what environments you use to test your application and also where you're testing them, and think about how you're testing during this period. So my final thoughts here are, consider which execution environments you're using and why. It's unlikely that just one of them is going to satisfy all your needs. Think carefully about where you're testing and why, and who, and think about the personas of the people testing, developers versus QA. Check in with your team. Do they have what they need to keep going during the pandemic? And do you need some solutions to get them testing and developing again on a broad range of devices? Have a bias towards fast feedback by testing as early as possible. Totally okay to let developers do testing in their own frameworks and in their own tools and environments. Work on how you can integrate that with the rest of the testing environment. And finally, reduce risks. Find out what devices your users actually use and test on them before release. You need to test on real devices, a small number, consider what they are and get them going. Finally, I think you'll see that today, one size does not fit all. One size does not fit all. Choose different environments for different purposes, choose different frameworks for different reasons, and work out how you can get them going together so you can join that signal up across your pipeline. With that, I will pause and see if there are any questions.
Thanks very much, Laszlo. Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm going to just take, we've only got just over a minute left in this session. Yeah. So I'm going to take the opportunity to point out that if you have any questions for Laszlo or his colleagues, he and Andy White will be hosting a breakout session at 1:50 Stockholm time. That is focused on software testing in the cloud. I have one question for you, which is, you talked about automated testing and having a comprehensive framework and think through the solutions. There continue to be issues that you need to use more traditional crowd testing and manual testing, thinking, for example, of many accessibility issues. How do you integrate that requirement into your framework?
So I think manual testing will always have a place. We'll always need to do some amount of manual testing. I think we need to think about this in the context of chaos and exploratory testing, where we just need to find out, actually just play around and see what happens. In terms of crowd testing, I think what the main goal with this tends to be to get really good coverage across different mobile networks and devices, I feel that it is possible to get that using a more automated approach with some of the things we were looking at earlier, the right frameworks, the right environments, using technologies like different points of presence and so on. So I think there are different options to approach that as well, using the things that we were talking about today.
So what I'm taking back from that is that crowd testing, where what you're doing is broadening your coverage, maybe you just need to think more comprehensively about what you're trying to solve, and then reduce the domain left for really genuine manual testing. Laszlo, thank you so much. Our next session starts in just under 5 minutes, and we will have a presentation from Shazeb Iqbal, Technology Lead and Chief Software Engineer at Nordea Bank, on the role of AI within customer experience and the importance of having a DevOps mindset as you look to deliver quality software. So once again, thank you to Laszlo Simity.